Greetings, travelers. Do you want to be the greatest Dragoon player that Final Fantasy XIV has ever had the pleasure to bear witness to? Then you've come to the wrong place. Here at Misshapen Chair LLC, we are all about being the most typical and most average player of video games. We never look beyond what games have a sizable marketing budget and never heard of Drakengard. I don't even know what that is and I just said it out loud. Today we will be learning how to Dragoon, where it might be helpful to review how positionals work, and then I will still put a small tutorial in this video to keep it accessible until I decide to saturate segments with obnoxious edits. Can anyone even hear me? To begin our journey, I will assume you are fresh. Dragoon is a job that you unlock by finding all 3 pieces of it in a single match of City Trial, or alternatively by starting as or unlocking Lancer. Upon reaching level 30, alarm bells will go off and a giant indicator will scream at you to unlock a real job instead of being a YouTuber. Then you will ignore this for about 5 levels before being publicly shamed into unlocking Dragoon. If you like the Lancer aesthetic more, you are invalid and I hope you feel bad about it. At some point in the lore, you will wonder if you are supposed to love or hate dragons while playing this job, and I can say the answer is a resounding yeah. Remember, a woman did canonically fuck a dragon at some point, and a dragon did not kill Heavensward, spoiler, or whatever his name was. The only part of the lore that mattered— Papalimo. That was his name. The only part that is relevant to you is being infused with dragon blood. Gives you a high resistance to rising blood alcohol content levels, turning you into the life of the party, and providing a buff to the entire group, and even handing out a jello shot to a fellow DPS. This used to tie a red thread of fate between you and your drinking buddy, but it was removed because nobody has friends anymore, and people can't choose to play with effects off if it's a problem. In the days of Eld, Dragoon was a notoriously funny job due to its punishing nature. Animation locks causing you to die to avoidable damage, gap closers, used for DPS, causing you to die to avoidable damage, innate server lag, causing you to die to avoidable damage, or if you're really ancient, your DPS buff making you take more damage, causing you to die to unavoidable damage. Dragoon's comedy factor was so unparalleled that everyone still jokes about it to this day, and nobody even knows why.
Floor take, am I right, guys?
Now we have to rely on Dunscaith to get a good laugh. How did the Dragoon players of Eld overcome all this adversity? By not being a little bitch. A good Eld and Dragoon player was a thing to be moderately appreciated, unless they believed in parses. In current expansion, where all of this will be invalid since Dragoon is getting a rework upon the release of 7.0, it is not punishing at all and commands as little respect as every other job in the game. I fully expect the rework to include an emotional support cat to appear upon breaking a combo action to help players cope with their inadequacies. The exact opposite of Ninja, and why Makote is the superior race. This has made it incredibly hard to get my masochistic fix, so I settle on asking for some 1 and 3 minute raid buffs back and have Yoshi P tell me, no, now pay your sub and buy some more cash shop items, pussy. To understand the core of Dragonair, we must first understand the 7 core GCDs. 1 too many for the newer player to handle, but you have about 64 levels to adjust and this isn't a leveling guide. This consists of 2 5-button combos that you will alternate between for your entire loop, or as I like to call it, the figure 8 life cycle, because calling it a rotation makes it sound generic. Because it is. One combo hands you a damage buff and applies a dot, while the other just does damage. The logical conclusion is to use this buffing dot combo first and the other second, then alternate them until the end of time. Performing the dot combo requires the rear positional technique of standing right on the edge of the pizza slice indicator for where the back is and then moving slightly outside of that to hit the flank. If you have been moving across the universe to hit positionals and thought they were super hard, you're welcome for making your life easier. Just keep in mind that these positional hitboxes do extend all the way inside of the boss. If you know the easy trick and still hate positionals in fights where the boss spins around a little bit because planning true north is unfun to you, I would recommend looking into the blue DPS position, or perhaps the Fizz range slot instead. How about instead of removing positionals, we remove you. Both the dot and the following combo action require you to hit it from the back, then the next button requires a flank. And as a secret, you will stay on that flank all the way until you hit the flank again, and then move to the back and rinse and repeat. Dragoon is somewhat unique in this aspect of only having to swap positional locations once every 5 GCDs. However, you will still have to do them back to back, so knowing how to minimize movement is very nice. It's also helpful to note that all other buttons do not require positionals, and your Jello Shot DPS buff also eliminates positional requirements for its duration. And you totally don't forget about this change every time you do an opener this expansion. This figure 8 life cycle forms the backbeat of all of your dance moves, as everything else on Dragoon is weaved in between. Great. I will now immediately move into an opener. Relax, you already know all the GCDs that you're going to use in a row. I'm just giving an example of how to mash everything else. As per usual, this is just an example. Many times the order of weaves can be switched around as long as you are landing all of your big buttons inside of raid buffs, except for Gear Skogul, but I'll stress you out about that later. Begin by suboptimally backflipping into battle, then press True Thrust. If you plan to take an adrenaline shot, this is about as good as time as any. Then press Disembowel, double weave Lance Charge, and give a Jello Shot to your fellow melee or dancer or whatever DPS you feel like deserves it. Then press Chaotic Spring and weave Battle Lit. Then press Wheeling Thrust and double weave Gear Skogul in Life Surge, and then press Fang and Claw. Then double weave High Jump, enjoy that animation lock, and Mirage Dive. Then press Ride and Thrust, which is what True Thrust turned into, and weave Dragonfire Dive. Then press Vorpal Thrust and double weave Spine Shatter Dive and Life Surge. Then press Heaven's Thrust and weave a second Spine Shatter Dive. Then simply continue the GCDs from there, but make sure to weave Wormwind Thrust when it's up. It charges after pressing 2 Raiden Thrusts, especially if you took that adrenaline shot earlier because it will land inside of that window. Now I will explain everything that I skipped over. 1. True Thrust turns into Raiden Thrust after correctly performing a combo. In other words, with correct play, you will use True Thrust once, and all the subsequent ones will turn into Raiden Thrust instead. Battle Lit is a crit buff, and dot ticks can no longer crit in Endwalker. This is why weaving it after your dot is okay. 3. Keen-Eye travelers might have noticed there is another weaving slot open after Battle Lit that you could use, but there is a small chance that all of your party buffs will not be up yet depending on team composition and how on the ball everyone is. This is extremely minor in the grand scheme. If you have a more comfortable opener in mind that uses a double weave right there, feel free to do so. Or maybe you want to weave a feint in there to feel like you're contributing to mitigation. 4. Life Surge causes your next GCD to be a guaranteed critical hit, and technically lifesteal. It would make sense to use it on your highest potency GCD of Heaven's Thrust, but since we get 2 charges this expansion, we spend 1 charge on Fang and Claw or Wheeling Thrust in the opener to put it on cooldown faster and not overcap. And then we spend it on Heaven's Thrust and everything makes sense again. And 5. All of your jumps and gap closers have a hard animation lock. In the past, this was long enough that you could not double weave in the same slot with them without drifting your GCD. This is no longer true for most dives. And even though it looks like you jump to the target and back for high jump, your character is considered to be standing still for that entire animation. It is a little confusing with what you can get away with if you are unfamiliar. In general, you can weave skills that have a hard animation lock in the same window as a skill that doesn't, as long as you have a solid internet connection. However, you cannot double weave 2 hard animation locks in the same window without drifting. And Stardiver is the super hard animation lock that you cannot weave anything else with. But you don't even know what that is yet because I haven't talked about it. Yes, to the ire of many, Dragoon is one of the only jobs left in the game that cannot press all of its glorious buttons from the first second of combat. They have to wait a minute to use a bunch of shit every minute after that. Introducing your entire life as Dragoon. Gear Skogul. This innocent little 30-second timer is going to be thrusted into your skull as if you're getting lobotomized, because it gates you from all other cooldown alignment. Remember Mirage Dive? Of course you do. You take notes and pay attention very closely as I blitz through every cooldown in the opener. Well, I should probably elaborate. Every time you execute High Jump, you can press Mirage Dive anytime within 15 seconds after that. That timer isn't super important other than knowing that it's flexible. Upon pressing 2 Mirage Dives, Gear Skogul will light up and executing it will bring you into Life of the Dragon mode. During this, Gear Skogul changes into Nastrond and has a 10-second cooldown. In a perfect world, you will land Gear Skogul and 2 Nastrons inside of all of your buffs that you also press perfectly on cooldown like like you're supposed to. That is only possible with strict management of Gerskogel's timer, and you will know when you start to drift it. On top of adding Nastrond into your burst window, this also adds another small little cooldown called Stardiver, which is the button that you cannot double weave with and is one of your highest potency skills. Life of the Dragon lasts for 30 seconds and you want to press 3 Nastronds in total during it, but only 2 of them will land inside of buffs. 30 seconds might sound a bit familiar. If you are me and you're used to looking at cooldowns to remember when they come back up as you're learning a job, this will throw you off because Gerskogel is replaced by Nastrond and you cannot see its cooldown. Instead, you want to be looking at your Life of the Dragon timer and start mashing that button like a StarCraft pro as Life of the Dragon is about to end. This will ensure that Gerskogel does not drift and will instill the internal 30-second timer into your soul. Having this rhythm is the most important step to playing Dragoon at the average level. Before you go practice on a training dummy, there's a couple of other curveballs you might want to be aware of. Depending on your GCD speed, your dot will fall off again before you reapply it, even with stereotypical play. This is okay and not something to worry about. I'm sure that won't cause people to get very upset. And outside of your opener, you want to use Life Surge on Heaven's Thrust. Mostly. Okay, this is one of those outside of the scope of being mediocre things. If you're really curious about optimizing Dragoon even further, there is a specific cycle to follow where you spend Life Surge on Heaven's Thrust most of the time, and save 2 charges around your 4 and 6 minute burst windows to spend it on a different GCD occasionally depending on the burst as part of the cycle. This isn't something that I think you should even be aware of unless you're already very comfortable on the job, but I do want to acknowledge it before the optimizers crucify me yet again for giving mediocre advice and not highly optimized advice. If you use my method, you're gonna lose about 8 potency per minute instead. Wait, that's it? Oh, for fuck's sake, I lose more subscribers than that every time I post a non-Final Fantasy XIV video. When you put all of this together, your 2-minute burst window is a nice, relaxing, frantic affair of trying to fit everything into your breakdance routine and probably failing if you're at the beginning process of learning. I assure you, this is something that becomes easier over time as you get used to all the buttons you are attempting to cram in and figuring out what works best for you. However, I want to stress that getting used to mashing Gerskogel as your life timer is running out is the most important thing to have a chance at breakdancing correctly. Of course, I am well aware that you don't want me to tell you to figure it out for yourself. You just want to hear what I do. Excellent. 1 minute into combat, Lance Charge will come back up and you're going to press it on cooldown like a good noodle. You should also have a Life Surge charge come back up to spend on Heaven's Thrust, probably. Weave Gerskogel as soon as humanly possible and Nastrond as well. Then after the next GCD, I double weave High Jump and Mirage Dive. 1 GCD later, I try to weave Stardiver if mechanics allow it. And make sure to weave Whirlwind Thrust at some point because it will be up. And in theory, the next Nastrond will also land inside of Lance Charge. At the even minute window, it's going to look a little something like this.
Why do I still this thing coming?
Yeah, I got nothing helpful for you. It's hard to be this cool. For the curious, it is optimal to use both Spine Shatter dives in the even minute burst window because I totally didn't need to hold on to one for actual gap closing reasons. But sometimes depending on the encounter, the movement might be really tight and trying to fit in another Spine Shatter dive just isn't possible. It's fine to instead use 1 in odd minute burst windows if you can't use 2 during the even minute ones. Lastly, I didn't have a great place to include this. Travelers with high awareness probably realize that it is possible to go into life phase 30 seconds into combat. This is not helpful since it doesn't align with any buffs. However, going into a life phase early because you know you will kill the boss faster than the next buff window is something that you can optimize if you really care. And didn't drift high jump into oblivion like me. But fuck practicality. Allow me to help you earn some style points. Setting your camera the legacy, because it's the correct way to play the game, will make it possible to perform the reverse elusive jump technique. While running, if you jump in the air and tap backwards, you can spin around mid-air while retaining momentum, and have your elusive jump propel you forward if you time it correctly, not even losing any frames due to walking backwards. This is trivial to perform on controllers. Once again, the skill is not practical, other than looking fly as hell, just like the Limit Break 3 animation. As usual, keep all those generic melee buttons in mind, like using arm's length to prevent knockback effects and mitigate when you reverse elusive jump ahead of your tank in dungeons. AoE on Dragoon is very straightforward once you finally have 3 GCDs to press. The AoE rotation even maintains your DPS buff. You're still going to weave everything under the sun to enter Life Phase because Stardiver and Nastrons are all AoE. Dragonfire Dive is a stupid button that you press on cooldown and single target, but it has no fall off in AoE and is very strong. Outside of jumps, all of your AoEs are cone or line shaped, meaning that you aim them the exact same way, and you even get stacks for Whirlwind Thrust while rotating. I'm surprised they actually made AoE clean on Dragoon this expansion, as long as you ignore the leveling experience. Just try not to dive into the AoEs too often, okay? Well, that's my soon-to-be irrelevant in a year Dragoon guide. I'm not sure what the rework will entail, even though I have a wiretap because I cannot understand Japanese. My safe guess is that Dragonfire Dive and
Redacted
are probably first on the chopping block, and some method will be added allowing you to use Life Phase in your opener, making the people who pretend like that matters for numerical reasons to justify their emotional job opinions feel happy. Be careful what you wish for, though. They'll probably just tie Life Phase to Lance Charge and then wonder why people will be upset about it. But I'm also not very invested in the job to begin with. I do have fun playing it in my limited mediocre capacity, but I'm contractually obligated to say that I prefer Samurai, especially when it has kite. Now let's get out there and stop elusive jumping off the platform, for God's sakes. A big thank you to all my Patreons for allowing me to beat Heavensward. Do you want to spend money every month on entertainment? Well then pay your sub to Final Fantasy XIV.